If you want to know what form Paradise Lost is in, it's simple because John Milton tells us. The verse. The measure is English heroic verse without rhyme, as that of Homer in Greek and Virgil in Latin. Rhyme being no necessary adjunct or true ornament of poem or good verse, in longer works especially, but the invention of a barbarous age to set off wretched matter and lame meter, graced indeed since by the use of some famous modern poets carried away by custom, but much to their own vexation, hindrance, and constraint to express many things otherwise, and for the most part worse than else they would have expressed them. Not without cause, therefore, some both Italian and Spanish poets of prime note have rejected rhyme both, both in longer and shorter works, as have also long since our best English tragedies, as a thing of itself to all judicious ears, trivial, and of no true musical delight, which consists only in apt numbers, fit quantity of syllables, and the sense variously drawn out from one verse into another, not in the jingling sound of like endings, a fault avoided by the learned ancients both in poetry and in all good oratory. This neglect, then, of rhyme so little is to be taken for a defect, though it may seem so perhaps to vulgar readers, that it is rather to be esteemed an example set, the first in English, of ancient liberty recovered to heroic poem from the troublesome and modern bondage of rhyming. Okay, Milton spent a good chunk of the Civil War years and the Commonwealth years as a propagandist. As a pamphleteer, he's partly famous, he's most famous for this, of course, but some of his other famous works are anonymous pamphlets. He just write about various matters of public interest. So he will throw down. He has a strong point of view and he's willing to go with it. First of all, let's say this is his definition. The measure here is the same as meter. A way of thinking of meter is the measure. English heroic verse without rhyme. Iambic pentameter here, heroic verse. Heroic, fit for epic. And, Milton says, look, Homer didn't rhyme. Virgil didn't rhyme. I'm writing an epic. It's not supposed to be in rhyme. What is this rhyme? Near the end, so little thought to be a defect, he also wants to point out, I am not failing to rhyme. I am not trying to rhyme. Don't blame me. It's not that I can't rhyme. He can rhyme. He writes masterful sonnets in the Italian rhyme scheme, which is harder than the Shakespeare rhyme scheme. He can rhyme if he wants to. Here he doesn't. He wants blank verse. All blank all the time. Is that free verse? No, no, no. Blank verse. He points to English tragedies, i.e. Shakespeare and Shakespeare's contemporaries, as a good example. Hamlet's great poetry, not rhyming? Same here. It's worth noting that Milton is publishing this poem during the Restoration, which is addicted to heroic couplets. I'll tell you again when we get to the final two units, which is prose, not poetry. The poetry of the long 18th century is couplet, 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 triplet, couplet, forever. Milton is having none of it, doesn't want any part of it. I want to point out something here. Milton is nothing if not political and religious, but it's politics and religion will come up constantly because they're in the forefront of his mind, because the man is in part a propagandist. Kind of at his heart, in his soul, he's a propagandist. He argues here that this is the first example he's claiming primacy for himself. I'm writing the first proper, unrhymed epic, the way epic is supposed to be. But it's also an example of ancient liberty recovered to heroic poem from the troublesome and modern bondage of rhyming. We should not mistake the politics of the people we read about in Britlit 1 for our politics or try to fit them into the terms of the debates of our day. Our versions of right and left, conservative and liberal, radical and reactionary, moderate, those are not the terms at all. if we try to map Milton onto today's 21st century politics, he's going to be in 4 different parties and in none of them. It's more important to figure out what are the political and religious terms in which he thinks in his day, framed by his debate. He's recovering ancient liberty. Milton is a revolutionary. We tend to think of revolutionaries as, and we would call him in some ways a leftist, in that he wants to get rid of monarchy, a more regressive form of leadership, for parliamentary government, which strikes us as more democratic, republican, that's small d, small r, more distributed, more modern. He's not art, but he says that he's not fighting for modernity. He is fighting for ancient liberty to be restored. In Milton's worldview, it's not that the bright future holds like liberty. Liberty is not about the future, about tomorrow. Liberty is about something you had at the beginning and should have restored to you. That modernity is bondage. And anciently, in ancient times, at the beginning, we were all free. We got to get back to that freedom. This is also a very long 18th century idea. Back to freedom, back to liberty, not forward. We're going to get rid of a king, not let's think of the bright future with no more kings because kings are terrible and retrograde into the past, which would be my position, kings. That's old, bad idea. No, let's go back far enough back in the past before there were kings, and we'll view kingship, which is thousands of years old at this point, as a terrible modern fad we're going to get rid of. Like we're going to get rid of at this point, what is it? 400-year-old fad of rhymed verse in English. Let's get rid of that crap. I'm sorry, 500 years. Let's get back to the unrhymed verse. Milton is actually right that English heroic verse used to be unrhymed. He just doesn't. But it's an accident. He's just being polemic. I also want to point out, we don't read him for his politics, or only for his politics. We read him because he's a great poet. First of all, he says meter is more important than rhyme. I've told you that before. If you have doubted it, John Milton's a pretty damn good poet. So I think you might want to consider his point of view. He despises, he's actually too hard. He's sometimes unfair. He comes, okay, some modern poets have done it because of custom, but because they had to, because it was the fad, because everybody was doing it. It was peer pressure. On Chaucer? On Spencer? Do you think Spencer seems driven by custom and peer pressure? Does Spencer seem to be someone who's doing exactly what he wants to do? Pretty much every stanza. You make the call. He also says, rhyme is trivial and of no true musical delight. Just a jingling sound of like endings. God, it's too childish, it's too primitive. He points us towards a subtler value, and here is a artistic manifesto. What is true musical delight? Consists only in apt numbers, fit qualities of syllables, and the sense variously drawn out from one verse into another. Let me go over that. Apt numbers, fit quantity of syllables, by count, by numbers, by meter, but also the sense variously drawn out from one verse to another. By verse, he means actually line of verse, each pentameter line. By sense, he means the content. Variously drawn out means this. You will notice, if you haven't already, if you've read even 10 lines into this poem, and I hope you have, you've noticed he jams like crazy. And jam and jam and jam. We're going to do a whole short video just on the first 16 lines. That is part of what Milton teaches us to read for is the way there are two structures. There is the pattern of the iambic beat going across the line, and then there's the pattern of the sentences, which are deliberately at cross purposes, at contrast. The sense variously drawn out from verse to verse, from one verse to another, means the sentences don't match up with the lines exactly the way they do in heavily end-stop verse, the way they do in the couplet mania of the rest of Restoration poetry. But it is in fact, you're reading two patterns that go against each other or in a conversation with each other. Read for that. He's telling us what to read for. As for rhyme, he's done with it. So are we. Let's see how he draws out the measure from verse and from verse to that draws out the sense from verse to verse. And also, since he believes you get back to liberty, to your ancient rights, by going back to the very beginning, let's read his poem, which starts for him at the beginning of time, or rather, shortly before human history begins.